The first step is going to be going ahead and cleaning all of the bezels with a little bit of rubbing alcohol to remove any of the oxidization. The Nunn Design findings are plated with the .999 fine silver and 24 karat gold, and then we put an acrylic oxidization over the top of it that needs to be removed or can be removed, and this prevents it from getting into the resin or onto the clay. So you'll need to have some Q-tips and some toothpicks and a little bit of rubbing alcohol. And I also use wet wipes. So go ahead and open up and put your Q-tip inside of the container. And then you'll want to go into the bezel with your Q-tip and rub it around these inside edge, outside edge, and the top lip. So all the various surfaces of the bezel. Also up inside here where the loop area is will be helpful. Once you have the rubbing alcohol onto the bezel, you'll go ahead and use your wet wipe to go ahead and clean off any of that oxidization. You can use your toothpick and wrap it inside of that wet wipe and go inside of that looped area and inside of these little corners in the bezel itself. So go ahead and clean up all the bezels. We're ready to go. Now that we've cleaned thoroughly the various bezels that we want to use, I'm going to go ahead and apply a little bit of tape on the back side. That way we can use the crystal clay inside of the bezels and have a nice flat surface on the back. To do that, we're going to need a little bit of packing tape. I'm using a U-line, very thick packing tape. And when you're doing this, you want to try to find an area on the packing tape because sometimes it has a lot of modeling of the tape. It's the glue, the adhesive on the back kind of makes it kind of little bit of modeling. And you want to try to find an area on the tape that has the least amount of that, because that will actually show up. I don't know if you can see any of it, but it'll actually show up on the clay itself. So place your tape down onto your surface and get your nice clean bezel and just apply it onto the tape and press down firmly so that you have a nice even contact. And then we're going to trim away the excess tape with our scissors. And go ahead and put the tape on all of the bezels and you'll be ready to go for the next step. Inside the package of crystal clay, you will have the crystal clay itself, part A and part B. It also comes with an applicator and has a little bit of beeswax on the top, which makes it possible for you to pick up chatons and embed it in the clay. And then it also comes with a pair of gloves. I don't like these gloves. They're very hard for me to use. My hands are smaller, so I tend to use a different type of glove. I have some latex gloves that I like to use. And there is a trick for getting as much life as you can out of these gloves. So I'm just going to take a moment to tell you how to do that. When you're pulling the gloves on and off of your hands, it's really nice to have your hands be nice and dry and not have any moisture. So what I like to do is use a little bit of baby powder. I put a little piece of plastic down on my work surface, and then I'm just fully coating my hands with the baby powder before I put them into the glove. So I'm just kind of going in and making sure that it's on in between my fingers, the baby powder. So once it's all on, then I can go ahead and put my gloves on. And then let's just say after I've finished using my crystal clay, let me show you, this is so much easier to get off because I can just pull on the fingers and then pull on the whole piece, and then my hand easily slides out, so I can continue to use these over and over again. So that's a nice little trick. With your gloves on, fingers all powdered first, you're going to want to pull off equal sized balls of part A and part B. I like to have a business card on the ready or a piece of plastic. These business cards are also covered with tape, and that allows me to place the clay onto here and not have it stick to the surface. The amount of clay that you pull off is dependent on what size of bezel you're going to use, and this is going to just take some estimating and practicing on your part to figure out exactly how much clay to use and mix per bezel. You might have a lot of projects going at once, so you would pull off more. Go ahead and open up the part A. Just going to try to keep that sticker on so that I can always identify what part is part A, but I can tell you that the one that's darker is always part B, and the color is always part A, and I'm working with white. So if I was working with black, it would be black on A, and this would be the same. And we also offer brown, and so A and then B. So open up part A from the kit, and you're going to pinch off a small ball of the clay. Again, dependent on how much you're going to be needing for your project, I highly recommend that you just continually add more if you need it, versus doing up a huge batch and having the pressure of having to use all of it. So I have a nice sized ball there of A. I'm not going to close that up yet. I just want to make sure that I have plenty. And then we're going to open up the package for part B. Pinch off a small ball, about equivalent in size. Let's see how we did. So this right here, the part B, this is the actual epoxy that we're going to be working with, and that is the reason why we use gloves altogether when we're mixing this clay, so that this isn't having direct contact onto our skin. This part is neutral, and then once these two activate, it then becomes neutral, and you can take your gloves off. I don't have enough of part B, so I'm just pinching off another little small ball and roll it in the palms of my hand and see if I have equal sized balls. You want it to be somewhat equal. This isn't as exact as it is with resin, the two-part epoxy resin, but you still want it to be somewhat equal in size. So that is approximately equal in size. I'm going to show you how you go ahead and, to prevent this from drying out over time as you use it, you'll want to make sure that you close this back up and try to keep it as airtight as possible. I'm using my little sticker. To close this back up. You can also use a little bit of tape. And then the thing that's different, when I go to close this up, I don't put these back in the same container. I'm going to use two separate ones. This is just to prevent these two from getting any kind of contact and potentially having some way in which they can be activated and possibly harden. So I have learned to put it into its own little Ziploc. I place it inside of there, and then I'm just pulling out any excess air before I zip this back up. And then I'll go ahead and do part A the same way. Closing it up. Putting it in its own little Ziploc. Folding it up, getting all that excess air out, and then sealing it shut. So now I have my A and B wrapped up and preserved for the next time. If I come back to this and this is hardened because I haven't used it for a long time, I can put it in some warm water. Just drop it right in the warm water and let it sit for a good 5 minutes. You might want to continually refresh to make sure it's nice and warm, and this will come back up to room temperature and will be softer to work with. It does have a shelf life though, so you have to take that into consideration when you're using that product. So now we're ready to mix our part A and our part B. Once you have equal sized balls, go ahead and take the balls, and with your gloves on, slowly or quickly start to blend these two parts together. So the white is the easiest to work with. The black tends to get all over my fingers more because there's so much pigment in the black color, and so it'll tend to get all over my gloves and leave little residue, but the white is one of the easier ones to work with. So mix the clay together fully until you have no more modeling and it's very well blended. And once it's all mixed together, and put it back onto my little card. And now that's activated, so I can take my gloves off. Before I do this, I like to use a little wet wipe just to make sure that my gloves are all nice and clean, because I'm wanting to make sure that I can reuse these gloves over and over again and prevent having a lot of waste. So I will pull at the fingers. This is the trick with that powder, and then the whole glove comes off easily and not inside out. Pull at my fingers, and now I have a nice pair of gloves that I can use the next time. The clay is now activated, so I can handle this with my hands. Before I do though, you might want to wipe down your hands because you have baby powder all over them. It's not going to affect the clay at all because I'm working with the white, but if you were working with the brown or the black, it would show up a little bit more of that baby powder from your hands. So now I'm nice and dry, and I can take my crystal clay and rolling it into a nice smooth ball, and I'm ready to do the next step. The next step is going to be colorizing the crystal clay, and I'm colorizing the crystal clay with Casting Craft opaque pigments. As you can see, this is my stash. I have all of the colors that make up pretty much every color that you can imagine. I store all of my Casting Craft in little Ziploc bags like this, so that if they leak, they only contaminate themselves, and I can clean out the bag or replace it. So the Casting Craft opaque pigments are incredibly potent, and you will have this for a really long time. The black and the brown tend to separate as you have them in storage, so when you get these out, you'll need to go ahead and shake them and have them blend together. So how we're using the Casting Craft pigments is we're using it to colorize the crystal clay. And there are numerous different types of formulas that you can follow to create just about any color that you can think of. We have used the 2019 2017 and working on 2020, we have all of the Pantone color formulas, and this is all on our website. We have little cheat sheets where it's showing all of the various formulas for making the colors that I'm working with. So for this particular tutorial, I am using black, blue, and white to create a denim look. Denim is very popular this year, and I wanted to create these pieces with these three colors so that I can get a denim-like look. So before I go farther, I'm going to show you that I made a little color sampler using the colorants. I've done this all in advance so that you can just see colors and choose from them, but you would want to make up your own color sampler if you choose a different color than what I'm going to be working with, which is these three colors. So on this, these are just my rough notes that I'm recording out what was the color formula for each of these in order to create the various colors. And I'll go over what a tiny TTB, this actually TT should be tiny toothpick. So TTP is a tiny toothpick of blue, and then we have a LG, which is a large toothpick of white. Those are my codes of what it's telling me the different formulas are. So let me show you how to do that next, how to build out a color sampler. To make your color sampler, I like to put 2 pieces of plastic or any kind of covering that you have on your surface, and this is what I'm going to squeeze my colorants out onto. So you can either do it by taking it, squeezing up some of the colorants and pulling it off of the actual top of this right here. As you can see, it's coming to the surface, or you can just put a little bit onto the piece of plastic that you're working on. I highly recommend that as soon as you squirt that, you put the lid back on, because I have numerous times have put the wrong color back on and it contaminates my whole top of my lid and I have to spend some time cleaning it up. So for these color formulas that I showed you before, I have a blue, a black, and a white. I put way too much down, just for your information. Don't put this much down, you don't need hardly any. Just go ahead and place that onto your work surface and then close your lids back up as you go along. Alright, before I start to even utilize this, I'm going to put my gloves back on. I'm going to use my baby powder to make sure that my hands are fully covered with the baby powder prior to putting my gloves on. This will help them so that I can get the gloves on and off easily. Putting my gloves on with my nice powdered hands. Alright, so now we have our gloves on, we have our mixed crystal clay, we have our 3 colors of casting craft, and we have our toothpicks. So another part of this that I highly recommend is that you have some wet wipes. I use these baby wipes from Costco. I really like these because they don't leave any fibers on my hands. So I have a bunch of these on this side ready to go. So it's just easy for me to grab them because this is going to get all over these gloves, as you will see. Alright, so let's go over what it looks like on the color formula for these 3. You can see that the denim is incredibly intense in color. And so that took, number 3, it took 3 large toothpicks of both blue and black to get that really intense color. So let me show you how to do that. This is the definition of a tiny toothpick. I mean, you literally just have hardly any on the edge of that toothpick. And this is the definition of a large toothpick. You have a lot of color onto the end of the toothpick. So I'm going to have 3 toothpicks designated per color so they don't mix. Now I'm going to have my my ball, so this formula is based off of a certain size ball, and this isn't the size. So for example, if you were going to flatten this down, it'd be way too big. I know that this ball is half of that size. So let's say this is a large blueberry size ball in order to get this formula that I'm doing here. So have a large blueberry size ball, we'll use the other one for another project, or another color, and I'll flatten the crystal clay down into kind of like a little disc. Now I'm going to pick up my formula again, called for that third one down. It was 3 large toothpicks of both the blue and the black. That's my code for what I've done before. So it's a really good idea that you constantly are tracking whatever it is that you're doing and recording so that you can get the same results. So that's 1, 2, 3. So 3 large toothpicks of my blue. Just going to rotate that slightly. And now I'm going to put in 3 large toothpicks of the black. So I just made that flat ball so that I can put my colors in there. And I have a less of a chance, I'm going to fold this kind of up like a little burrito. I have a less of a chance to get so much of this pigment all over my gloves and more of it on the actual, in the actual clay, but you can see it's starting to ooze out. Don't worry about it. It's going to go and you're going to make a little bit of a mess. So you're going to go ahead and just blend these 2 colors together to get that super intense blue. So we had to put so much pigment down on this because the clay itself is white, so it takes a lot more pigment. The other formulas are very, very light. So go ahead and mix these together until it's fully blended. If the clay is super sticky and it's getting all over your gloves and you're not just seeing pigment, but you also have a lot of clay coming off, let your clay sit for a good, I mixed it and then I'd wait a good 10 minutes because it'll help the clay be less soft, and it'll kind of firm it up a little bit before you actually do this step, and that will prevent it from getting all over your hands. All right, so then you can stop and you can take a look, like how close am I to my actual formula that I wanted to do. Oops, sorry. And you can see, you know, that that's pretty darn close to my actual formula. I can add a little bit more pigment into this. I probably would do an equal size pigment to make it even more intense if that's what if I wanted to do that. So then once you have this mixed up together, in order to continue to use these over and over again, which I'm highly recommending, you take one of your wet wipes and you just get the pigment off of your gloves. It will stain, but it's gonna dry and it won't come off on the next time that you mix another color. Or, you know, like I have all kinds of gloves. Some of them are blue, you know, so even if I did, which I haven't had that experience, but it could happen, then, you know, I would be working with colors that I've already have in my colorized clay. Hope that makes sense. So go ahead and rinse your clay off, your fingers if you had any clay on your gloves, and you can also rinse all of that colorant off of your gloves. Now I'm going to go ahead and, because I have so much pigment in here, I'm just wanting to make sure that I don't have any, you see that it's not fully blended, so I'm going to spend a little bit more time blending this together so that I don't have any of that variation. I couldn't really see what was going on so much because I had so much of the pigment on my hands. I'm rolling it in a ball, taking a look, you know, how am I blended together, and then I can, you know, adjust this. I can add more pigment to it and continue to add to it until I have it just right. And so that's how you go ahead and you can do different variations and make a color sampler for yourself. And you can see the different formula that I did to create all of the variations that I have. After your samplers are dry, I highly recommend that you pull them off your cards and then label them 1, 2, 3 so that you have a reference to what the different colors are. And then you would place them, once they're cured, you place them back into your little cello bag, and you'll have your color sampler with your formula for next time. I went ahead and mixed my crystal clay, and then I followed my color formula to make this darkest color here. And my color formula was 3 large toothpicks of the blue and 3 large toothpicks of the black to get to this dark denim color. So now I'm ready to put the clay inside of the Nunn Design bezels that I've placed some tape onto the back. After I mixed my clay, I let it sit for a good 10 minutes to kind of harden up because it's super soft and the dye is very potent in there. So by letting it sit a little bit, it'll make it a little bit less sticky. This is pretty sticky still, but we're gonna go ahead and move forward and pinch off a ball. And I'm rolling it into a nice round surface, and you can see that the pigment is releasing a little bit on my hand because there's so much pigment to make this one really dark color. I'm wanting to put enough of this color in here so this is going to be a flush surface, and it looks like I have way too much, so I'm going to go ahead and pinch off a little bit more. Go ahead and put this right on the surface in my work area so it's not so dark. Roll the clay into a ball so there's not any creases on there, and then place into the bezel. I'm going to use a wet wipe to wipe down my hands to get rid of any of that colorant that just was released onto my hands. And then picking up the bezel, I'm going to press the clay down in, flushing it. I want this to be flush on all four of this, all of the sides of the hexagon. If I don't have enough clay for this to be flush, and it looks like I might be a little bit under what I need, I can go ahead and grab some more. Pinch off another small ball. Roll that. And place it onto the surface. Now I'm blending these two layers together into a nice patty. So this clay is still pretty sticky, so I think I will probably, if you're working with it and it's super sticky, then go ahead and wait another 10 minutes until it firms up. Once you have your clay fully into the piece, if you have any problems getting it over into any of the corners, you can use a toothpick to move that over into the corner. You can see where I blended those two seams together. I want to make sure that, you know, put the second ball on top of the first ball. Just make sure that you have a nice smooth surface. Alright, once your clay is into the piece, use a wet wipe. I'm going to grab a clean one, and I'm going to come along these outside edges right here and just wipe away that excess clay. I can go in there with the very tip of my fingernail and just make that a nice clean edge. So the crystal clay, you have 120 minutes to work with it. When you colorize it and it's this saturated, it takes even longer, so you have a long time to work with this clay before it sets up. But once it sets up, it sets up. So you want to make sure that you have a nice clean surface before it has time to cure. can see that I still have a little bit of blended area there. Let's come back in. My finger is slightly wet from the wet wipe, and I can just blend that area until I have a nice smooth surface. So go ahead and fill the other bezels that you would like to have with that color, or you can make other colors from the cheat sheet. For this next step, I'm going to use a little bit of PearlEx powder, Jacquard PearlEx powder. It comes in many different colors, but we're working with the silver and the gold. And we're going to apply that to the surface of this to give it an interesting design. I've already made a little cheat sheet for myself to kind of get an idea of what these powders are going to look like on this kind of clay and what's going to give me the best pop. And I'm going to try this one. I'm going to try the gold on that. So to do this, what you'll want is another little Ziploc, and I'm going to place a little bit of baby powder on this to make sure that it doesn't stick onto the surface of this clay. This clay, again, is still really wet. It's still really sticky, but we're going to go ahead and do this so I can show you. But it's fine if you just leave this sitting, and I'd say even like another half an hour before you do this step. So I'm going to place a little bit of baby powder onto the, I'm just putting a little bit of baby powder. I'm mostly wanting it right up on this edge because this is where I'm going to be placing it onto the clay itself, right up here. So I put a little baby powder down on that. And this is just to prevent it from sticking onto the clay. I'm taking my bag and putting it over my trash can and just getting that excess powder off. So I've decided to work with this gold color, which is the same in your kit if you're doing the class, is the PearlEx powder and the gold. So when you open these up, it's best to kind of tap down on the surface of it, and that prevents it from too much of the powder from releasing up into the air. And you'll need to have a Q-tip. So for this, I want to, let's see, I'm going to do the design where I just have it on the bottom part. So I'm taking, zoom in here a little bit so we can really see what we're up to. I'm going to take the bag and I'm going to place it, let's say we're going to have from where the bag is placed, that will stay the blue, and then from then on down will be the gold. So I want to make sure that that's nice and straight. Tap that down gently, and that's going to give me a nice surface. And getting a little bit of the PearlEx powder on my Q-tip. I dipped it inside of there, and then I'm tapping the side, and then I'm going to just smear it. Let's try that again. Place my bag onto the surface. This is going to give me that nice clean line that I need and want. And now I'm going to smear my powder on there. So I'm not worried about getting it on the side edges because I can come back and clean. And you can see I have a nice clean edge where the bag was. So now we're going to let this fully cure, and then we can come back in and wipe away some of that excess off of the sides. These pieces have sat for a good 12 hours, and I'm ready now to clean the sides of the bezels and to remove the tape off the back. The PearlEx powders, when they've been applied to the crystal clay, are still going to be easy to wipe away as the clay is still curing. So you want to be very careful when you come in and use your wet wipe. I'm just using the tip of my fingertip, the little fingertip of the fingernail that I have there, and going along that side edge to wipe away any of that mica or PearlEx powder. Jacquard PearlEx powder is a mica powder. That's why I sometimes use those two words. So go in along the sides and clean up the edges of your piece to make sure that you have a nice clean bezel edge. I'm also gonna blow on this one to get off that excess. I'm gonna put this over my garbage can and give it a little blow to get that excess mica powder off. Now that we have cleaned off that mica powder, I'm still gonna be very careful to not touch that area until I seal it. So that's what we'll do next. We'll go ahead and seal it. So the thing that you can read an article that I have on how to seal the PearlEx powders. There's a variety of ways. I'm using this resin spray because it's also something that we've used for the organics. So I'm just keeping it consistent and using one product, but you can see other ways in which you can seal the products. The product meaning the Jacquard PearlEx powder on the crystal clay. So to seal this, I'm going to take this outside and I'm going to spray it with the resin spray and be right back. While my resin spray is drying on the pieces, I'm just using a wet wipe to wipe down my business cards and get any of the excess mica or the Jacquard PearlEx powder off of the cards so that I can have a nice clean surface. Alright, these pieces have been sprayed now with the resin spray outside, and you can see it kind of gives it a slight glossy look, not too heavy. But the next step is we're going to remove the tape off the back side of this, and it's just super easy. Just pull that off, and that is what the back side will look like. If for whatever reason you didn't push down all the way into all the crevices, you could have a little gap in the backside, and so it's a good idea that when you're pressing the clay down that you just flip it over and just check the back to see if you have indeed if you have any air pockets in the back. In the demo, I didn't do as great of a job as I would have liked to right along here, where my surface of the bag went down. If you have a little bit of residue on the back of your piece, when that tape comes off, I didn't see it so much on the back of this, you'll want to use a product called Goo B Gone, and you can put a squirt of this on the back side and remove any of that tape. And put a plastic down before I put the Goo B Gone. The thing that I don't want is I don't want that Goo Gone all over that front side, because I just sprayed it with the resin spray, so I just put a small little drop on the back side of this one. You let it sit for a couple of minutes, like 3 minutes. I'm just making sure that I have it over in that area over there too, and then just let that sit for 3 minutes. Once this has set for a couple of minutes, just zoom in so you can see I'm just coming in. I had a little bit of that goo gone right there, or that sticky residue right there, and it just comes right off. Then with my wet wipe, I'll wipe away that off of the back surface. So I'm still making sure that I'm mindful of what's going on the front, because I still need to have some time with this side. Actually, some did come over. So I'm just wiping off the surface of the front too. Now I'll let these set up fully. I want to show how you can use a round piece to make these fun little balls like this. So for this, you're going to want to have your nice, this is a tiny little guy, it's super fun to work with. And you're going to want to have your crystal clay. I'm going to use about half of that ball, I'd say. You can kind of take a guesstimate, maybe this size of a ball. Place that down on my bag, and I'll wipe my hands clean. So this one, really, you should wait the full 10 minutes or until the clay is getting a little bit harder, because it's going to be, you can tell how sticky this is, but I'll show you how you do this. Roll it into a nice smooth ball with in the palm of your hands. And I like to make kind of like a little bit of an, at first I'm not sure exactly how much clay I have here, so I'm just kind of looking at like, how is that going to fit inside of there, and am I going to have too much? And I might have a little bit too much there, so I'm going to pinch off a little bit more. Set that aside, roll it into a nice ball. And then pick up your bezel. That's going to be just about right. Okay, so I want to make sure that I don't have all of that pigment on my fingers. Just makes it easier to not have to clean up the bezel itself. If this is really getting too sticky on your hands and you really insist on working with it, you can always put a little bit of baby powder on your hands to get it to stop sticking. So I have just a little bit of baby powder now on my hands. Let's see, it won't stick. It shows up a little bit in the clay, but not very much. All right, so now we're going to kind of make a little bit of an oval-like shape, and that will help us to thread it through the bezel. And then you can come back in and fill it out. Now, this isn't going to have a real large round ball effect. It'll be a little bit more of a flat one. So if we want even more of a ball, which I probably had the right amount before, I'm just going to add a little bit more back in. Make that oval, thread it through, and then you just kind of sculpt it into place. You can make it be oblong like this, just kind of get it into place, and then you just move it back and forth in your fingers to kind of get an interesting shape, you know, depending on whatever you like. Let's go for that round ball. So I have it inside of my palm of my hands, and then once I kind of get it into position, like equal size, equal ball sizes on each. Just roll it around in the palm of your hand. I'm just slightly, I'm not pushing down very hard, and I'm just moving it around. It's doing two things. One, it's adhering to the side wall of the bezel, and it's kind of giving me a little bit of a ball-like shape. Now I can come back in with my finger and just sculpting it and making a nice ball shape. So you can continue to work with that until it's just where you like it. And then for letting it cure, you're going to thread that and just dangle it from a cup, and then let that cure for the full. It takes about 14 hours for this to cure, but it continues to cure for another 72. Before we let that sit there though, let's just go back in and make sure that we don't have any of that clay on these outside edges. Just cleaning this up real quick before we let it cure. Sculpting it, getting it into that nice round shape that we want. Placing the toothpick through the ring, and then letting that cure. So here are the two final pieces. These are still in the process of curing, but I went ahead and did a resin spray so that you can get an idea of how to do that. Cleaned off the backs on those. This is the piece that we did yesterday, and we dangled it from the toothpick so that it can fully cure. So that is done, and here's some examples of the other pieces that I've created. Just, trying different varieties of, this is a totally different clay combination that I made with the colorants versus this. And here's even lighter color techniques that you can do with this. I have on this is gilding flakes, so you can try gilding flakes instead of using the PearlEx mica powder to get a full and different look. On this, I texturized with a little bit of mica in my mold, and I made a mold and then texturized it. So there's all kinds of fun things that you can do with all of the extra little parts and pieces you have from this set.